All right. I want you guys to take a moment, and I would like for you to read through number 1, and I want you to jot down your thoughts underneath part A after you read through number 1 about what you think is wrong with the survey, and then I'd also like you to look at part B. Do you think the mayor will over or underestimate the true mean age of people in Springfield, and why? So I'm going to give us about 2 minutes, read through that, and jot down your initial thoughts about these two things. So initial thoughts. What's wrong with this? What? So he's only looking at landline telephones. Why is that a problem? Sorry, one more time. Okay, I like it. I love that you jotted that down. That would be a very good thing to add to your paper if you didn't have something like that. You had thoughts? Oh, basically the same thing. Does anybody, and it's okay if the answer is no, does anybody remember like landline telephones or been around landline telephones anytime in the last 15 years? So my cell phone lives in my pocket like almost all the time, including right now. Like I got my phone in my pocket. So if somebody calls me, I know they've called me. Is that always the case with landlines? No. Landline telephone, I leave, I go to the store. I don't find out until I get home that somebody called me. And if they didn't leave a message or leave their number, I've got no way of getting in touch with them again. So I think that would be a problem too. Or even if I do know that they're calling, maybe I just don't answer the phone. Or maybe I answer the phone and I hear that it's somebody asking me a survey question and it's click and I'm done. So I think all three of those things, and we could probably come up more if we kept talking about it, right? So we have an issue with them being landlines. People without landlines can't be contacted. That's kind of what Juwan was saying. This would be an issue called undercoverage. Because what's the population that the mayor is interested in finding out about? He wants to know about the average age of people in the city. So who's his population of interest? Everybody in that city. Is he pulling his sample from everybody in that city? He's only pulling his sample from what? The people with landlines. 50 years ago, this probably would have been a great way to do it. But it is not 50 years ago. So he's ending up with something with a problem called undercoverage. His population of interest is much, much larger than the population that he went to select his sample. There's a whole bunch of people that he is interested in that didn't even have the option of being part of his sample. And then we also mentioned some people won't answer the phone or they're going to hang up. That would be what's known as a non-response issue. These are both types of bias. These are things that will skew the results of his study away from what the true average is. So do you think that his method is going to end up overestimating or underestimating the true average age? Overestimating would be my guess too, for the reason that Joanne gave earlier. It's mostly older people that still actually have landlines. I was so proud of my mom when she moved a couple years ago because she did not transfer her landline phone service. So she's now just with her cell phone. I was like, thank you. She didn't even have voicemail on her landline. Like, she had an old school answering machine hooked up to her landline. I was like, come on. Like, let's enter the 21st century. So I said it would be an overestimate. Younger people are more likely to have cell phones while older people have landlines. And even with that, it's not nearly as many older people. There's a lot of older people that are switching over. So this list of people with landlines is getting really, really small. I'm surprised he could find 300 people in his city with landlines. I would like for you guys now to look down at number 2 and answer basically the same 2 questions on number 2. So read through number 2 and answer parts A and B. I'm going to give us about 2 minutes to do this again. So number 2, parts A and B. Jot down your thoughts if you haven't already. What do you think is wrong with the survey? Do you think it's going to over or underestimate? Jot down your thoughts about why you've selected over or underestimate. So what is wrong with this? Yes. There's no proof that they did their homework. So they might be lying. Absolutely. You would lie? You get an email from the principal, did you do your homework last night? Yes. Yes, sir, I did, Principal Wally. I did all of my homework in all my classes. Not everybody even answered the email. That's a problem too. How many of you guys check your email like every single day? Yeah, like see right there, we've got the same problem here. I like the idea of checking my email every day. I usually check my work email every day, but my personal email not so much. And let's not even talk about my husband's 17,000 unread emails. Not kidding, I took a picture of the icon on his phone because I've got a friend that cannot stand the red dot, the notifications. And I was like, here, have this. And she's like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have an attack. Joking, of course. But she's just like, I would not be able to handle that. All right, so not everybody replying would be another example of non-response here. Non-response. They were selected to be part of this survey, and they didn't participate. If this is going to be valid, I really need information from everybody that was selected. Imagine if we had done these dot plots yesterday and only 5 people put up dots. Like, would we be able to see what that's actually looking like for the big group? It wouldn't have been nearly as impactful. And as mentioned, they might lie and say they did their homework. This is something called response bias. They did respond, but based on either how the question was asked or who was doing the asking, they weren't honest in their responses. We saw something similar to this happen back at the 2016 election. Do you guys remember what happened in the 2016 election? That's when a certain someone was elected. They did all this polling beforehand, and he was not predicted to win. Like, at all not predicted to win. This was shocking when people woke up the next day and found out that we had someone who doesn't know how to use self-tanner in the office. So we had issues. They were trying to figure out why they'd been so wrong in their polling, and they came down to it was probably one of these 2 reasons, or a mix of both. People either didn't answer when they were asked, so non-response because they didn't want to say, or they lied. Do you think this is going to end up overestimating or underestimating how many people did their homework? Or the proportion, rather? Probably going to end up overestimating. Students who did respond were proud they did their work, or they lied and said they did their work. But either way, we have an overestimate. Maybe that's why the 60 people that were emailed that didn't respond, maybe that's why they didn't respond. They didn't want to own up to the fact that they hadn't done their homework. If you didn't normally do all your homework, but you did last night, and then you get an email from the principal, wouldn't you be excited to say, like, absolutely I did. I got it all finished up. Right? You want to see? Here. All right. One more time for good measure. I want you guys to read number 3 and answer the 2 questions there, parts A and B. What's wrong? Do you think it will over or underestimate? I'm going to give us another, let's take another 2 minutes. So there's a proposal to cut some of the funding for the fire department. One of the firefighters in the city wants to know the proportion of people in his neighborhood who support the budget cuts. So he takes a random sample of 30 homes and he visits them dressed in his uniform. What's wrong with that? Yes. He did it in his uniform. Why is that a problem? I'm sorry, one more time, I couldn't hear. They're going to feel obligated to just like, here's a firefighter right in front of me. I know you're a firefighter. You're like dressed head to toe in your gear. No, I don't want to take away your paycheck. I don't want to cut your funding. So this would be, again, response bias. This is response bias. Response bias is when how the question is asked or who is doing the asking affects people's answers. They don't tell the truth. They might not lie, but they might not tell the full truth either. Do you think the firefighter is going to over or underestimate the true proportion of his neighbors who support the budget cuts? You think he's going to overestimate? He's going to come back with more people? I think it's going to be an underestimate. Remember, he's asking, do you support the budget cuts? No, sir, I don't. He's trying to figure out how many yeses there are. Yes. Yeah, you could also argue, other than just being in his uniform, he's doing this in his neighborhood. His neighbors probably know him. If he wants to do this and get a true count, he should probably pick a neighborhood that's not his in the city and not go in uniform. So I think this would be an underestimate. People are more likely to lie and say that they're against the budget cuts than what they actually are. So these are some potential problems. We didn't really run into these problems when we were doing our sampling activities because the letters in a word don't lie. The letters in a word can't be, it's not like I systematically left out any specific words. We didn't run into these particular types of bias, but that doesn't mean that we didn't run into any bias at all. My convenience sample consistently did not accurately predict the average word count. So we still had bias there. But sometimes in the whole design of how you're doing it, not even what method you picked, but the design of your study there is problematic. Who's doing it? How are we executing this? What is the question? So 3 main types of bias that we talked about here. Undercoverage, some people are less likely to be chosen. So calling landlines or surveying homeowners in a city, leaving out everybody that lives in apartments or rental houses. Undercoverage specifically happens when my population of interest doesn't match where I'm going to get my sample. Non-response is either when people can't be reached, like you didn't answer the phone, or they chose not to answer. Didn't check their email, or chose to ignore the question that was asked. I can think of some debate answers where they ignored the question that was asked. And then response bias. This is problems in the data gathering instruments or the process. So examples would be people lying. We would have to find some way to control for whether or not people lie in our study if we think that's going to be an issue. Or the wording of the question, or we added up here who is doing the asking. I'm going to go ahead and add that to this piece. But hopefully without it getting too big. Principal or firefighter. All right. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes now to finish up our lesson. I want you to do the check your understanding. There's 2 questions here. For question number 1, there's parts A, B, and C. I want you to name the type of bias, so one of these three, undercoverage, non-response, or response, and then also explain why you think that is the type of bias that's coming up here. And then in question number 2, I again want you to tell me what type of bias is present, whether you think it's going to be an overestimate or an underestimate, and explain your answer. We're going to take about 5 minutes for this one. I should add, while you guys are still working on this, that other than those 3 types that we just talked about, we did mention 2 other types of bias, and I referenced one of them was convenience samples. Those will result in bias. Voluntary response will also result in bias. So I apologize for not mentioning those. So what type of bias would be showing if we have a counselor at a large high school and they select their random sample from those who signed up for remote learning? What's the bias there? I would consider this to be under coverage. I would consider this to be under coverage. The students who are doing in-person learning, their opinions aren't ever given the opportunity to be shared. So the counselor's population that they're interested in is everybody at the high school, but they only went to a small subset of that to pull their sample from. So not everybody had an equal chance of giving their opinion. Counselor selects a random sample of 100 students, so we like random samples, right? Random sample is good. They send them all an email, but only 28 students respond. Non-response bias. There were 72 students who were chosen to be in the sample, but they didn't respond. This is really important to note that what happened here is not the same thing as a voluntary response sample. A voluntary response sample would be like if they sent an email to everybody and they only looked at the people that responded. In this case, they selected 100 people that were supposed to be part of their survey, and only 28 of them responded. So it's not voluntary response, although that does cause bias as well. This is non-response bias. Part C, the counselor surveys the first 50 students that submit their learning preference for the upcoming school year. Why is that a problem? Kind of like a first come, first serve situation. Whose interest is this serving? Is this going to give the counselor a good idea of what the students at the school think? So why are they going with the first 50? Because it's convenient. The problem here is that it is a convenience sample. There's no randomly selecting here. The sample may or may not represent the population. We just went with what was easiest for me. All right, let's look at the second question to finish us off. Students at a certain high school completed a survey that included the following question. Social media use can negatively affect teens, distracting them, disrupting their sleep, and exposing them to bullying, rumor spreading, and unrealistic views of other people's lives and peer pressure. How many hours per week do you use social media? What type of bias is that? Response bias. Why? Yeah, after all that leading information there, like, do you want to fess up and be like, I'm on it over 100 hours? Probably not. Due to the wording of the question, the survey will likely underestimate the true average number of hours on social media because the students won't be truthful. Oh no. All right. Put your phones in the pocket. All right. We are. Hang on to that for you. I'll give it back to you at the end, I promise. And here's calculators for you ladies. All right, I want to talk for just a minute now about your homework, and then I'm also going to pass back your tests so that you guys can see that. There was a typo on the homework that a student pointed out to me, but I also wanted to talk about the directions for the first question too, so that you guys understand what we're looking for there. All right, first the typo. Let's talk about this. Let's look at the typo. The typo is in question 2, part B. I changed it up here. Does anybody see what it is? Say versus day. Day is what got printed on your page, and it should be say. What does it mean if we day the design? No idea what it means if we day a design. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing. Phone in a pocket. Here's your test.
Like, can you put one in my pocket?
Oh, right over there.
Do you watch in the City Guardian too?
If you have it, yes. All right. Number 1. The directions for number 1 says, for each of the following situations involving sampling, identify as precisely as possible the sample and the population. Then state the sampling design. So the population, you could give it to me, I don't know why that popped up, in one of 2 ways, but you would have to be very clear which thing you were talking about. One of them, when we're talking population, is population of interest. Who are they interested in? Or the population where they went for their sample. If you've already started doing this and you've already picked one of those 2 ways, stick with it the whole way through. I'll talk about that when we go over it on Monday. But if you haven't started doing it yet, I want you to put population down as what's the group where they went to get their sample from. So number 1 is a really good example of this that I'm talking about. Or sorry, not number 1, part A of number 1. So I'll kind of walk through this one with you guys, and then you can do the remainder of them on your own. It says a business school researcher wants to know what factors affect the survival and success of small businesses. So what's the population they're interested in? Which small businesses? Eating and drinking. That's where they went. They're interested in the survival and success of all small businesses. So that's their population of interest. Where did they go to actually select their sample? Eating and drinking establishments that are listed in the telephone directory. So the population where they went to get their sample was all the eating and drinking restaurants listed in that telephone directory, because those were the only things that could possibly be selected. So there's a couple problems with the way they're doing this study to begin with. There's a difference between the population that they're fully invested and interested in and the population that they're going to get their sample. And then it says we want to name, identify the sample. What is the sample here that's being taken? Who did this business school researcher select? Their sample was 150 eating and drinking establishments. So big population they're interested in is all small businesses. Population where they actually went to get their information was the eating and drinking establishments listed in the phone directory. Their sample is the 150 eating and drinking establishments that were actually selected. And then, what do you think the sampling design was? Let's see what I put down. Long thing. All right. Phone in a pocket. Yes, somebody said it would be a convenient sample. I agree. The researcher did what was convenient for them. They didn't do a random sample. It's not like they picked eating and drinking establishments because it was part of a strata, or they clustered them by type of business. They just picked out these 150 because it was easy for them. So that's the type of thing that I want here on number 1. When it says population, where did they go? They went to the phone directory. What was the actual sample? The 150 eating and drinking establishments. Sampling design was a convenience sample. That's all for part A. We want all 3 things. What's the population? What's the sample? The sample will usually, not always, but usually include a number. How many people, how many businesses, how many whatever, and then tell me what kind. So like the 40 selected people, the 150 selected eating and drinking establishments. So do you guys have a decent idea of what I'm looking for on that? Okay. The population would be, let's see, all the businesses listed in the telephone directory. All the businesses that are listed in the telephone directory. Specifically the eating and drinking establishments, sorry. All the eating and drinking establishments listed in the telephone directory. All right. There's nothing else that I wanted to make sure to point out on the homework. I don't know if you guys had any questions about anything on the homework while I'm here and at your disposal. Population, sample. So be very specific. In this case, it would be the 150 selected eating and drinking establishments. And then what the sampling design is, yes. So sampling design on this one would be convenience sample. All right. If you guys think of other questions that you want to ask me about the homework, I'm available, obviously, for the rest of the period. But I'm going to go ahead and pass back your tests so you guys can see how you did, and we can talk through those problems and answers.